What if a 512-acre cattle ranch in the Utah desert became the subject of a U.S. government-funded investigation? Not because anyone proved anything strange was happening there, but because enough powerful people believed something was. This is not a story about aliens. It's not a story about monsters. It's a story about a family who said their lives were destroyed by something they couldn't explain. A billionaire who spent millions trying to prove them right. And a legend so effective that it eventually reached the halls of the Pentagon. Home Sweet Homestead. The full story of Skinwalker Stranger. And far more human than the show you've seen on television. In the northeastern corner of Utah, in a valley called the Uinta Basin, there is a stretch of land that has been given many names over the decades. Locals once called it Sherman Ranch. Today, the world knows it as Skinwalker Ranch. What makes this story worth examining isn't whether skinwalkers are real, it's what actually happened here. On the record card, the purchases, the money, the government contracts, the television deals, and how a rural property became one of the most famous pieces of haunted real estate in American history. The ranch's name comes from Navajo folklore. A skinwalker, in Navajo tradition, is described as a malevolent witch, capable of transforming into an animal. It's important to note, this is a real and sacred part of Navajo belief. And many Navajo people consider the subject deeply sensitive and not something to be discussed casually, let alone turned into entertainment. The ranch itself sits near the border of the Uinta and Ouray Indian Reservation, home to the Ute tribe. Ekit. According to local legend, not documented history, tension between the Navajo and Ute peoples in the region led to a curse being placed on this land. Historian Sandra Jones, author of Being and Becoming Ute, has noted that relations between the two groups were historically strained, in part due to conflicts involving slave-taking. Beyond that, the curse itself is oral legend, not a verifiable historical event. Long before the ranch made headlines, the Uinta Basin already had a reputation. Locals reported unusual lights in the sky as far back as the 1950s and 1960s, and UFO reports in the region were publicized in the 1970s. In other words, the high strangeness reputation predates the ranch's modern fame by decades. From 1905 to 1987, the property was quietly owned by the Myers family, who, according to multiple accounts, including skeptical researchers, did not report anything unusual during their more than 80 years living there. That detail matters, and we'll come back to it. Here is the verified timeline of ownership and major events. In 1994, Terry and Gwen Sherman purchased the property, intending to raise cattle. Within weeks, according to their own accounts, they begin reporting disturbing events. Unexplained cattle deaths, strange lights, and sightings of a large wolf-like animal. In 1996, Senti, after roughly 2 years of reported incidents and mounting financial losses from dead or missing cattle, the Shermans sell the ranch. The buyer, Robert Bigelow, a Las Vegas real estate magnate and founder of Budget Suites of America, who had a documented, long-standing interest in UFOs and paranormal research. Bigelow purchased the property for approximately $200,000. After being contacted through journalist George Knapp, who had covered the Sherman family's claims for Utah newspapers. Between 1996 and 2004, Bigelow's organization, the National Institute for Discovery Science, known as NIDS, conducts a private investigation. The team includes physicists, veterinarians, and former law enforcement and military personnel. They install cameras, motion sensors, and magnetic field detectors and maintain a presence on the ranch around the clock. In 2004, NIDS ceases active operations, though Bigelow retains ownership of the property. In 2007, Senator Harry Reid of Nevada, working with Senators Daniel Inouye and Ted Stevens, helps secure $22 million in Department of Defense funding for a program called the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Applications Program, or AWSAP. Bigelow's aerospace company won the contract to run it, and the ranch became one of its documented points of interest. This is independently verifiable. AWSAP is a matter of public record and has been covered in Pentagon-related disclosures. In 2016, Bigelow sells the ranch for roughly $500,000 to a company called Adamantium Real Estate LLC. For 4 years, Home Sweet Homestead, the new owner's identity is kept anonymous, and the property is fenced off, monitored by cameras, and closed to the public. In 2020, Utah real estate investor Brandon Fugel reveals himself as the new owner. The History Channel premieres The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch reality documentary, a reality series following Fugel's team as they investigate the property using modern scientific instruments. From 2020 to the present, the show continues for multiple seasons, becoming one of History Channel's highest-rated programs, and turning the ranch into a global media phenomenon. That is the documented chain of ownership. What happened on the property during each of these eras is a very different question, and this is where fact and claim need to be carefully separated. Terry and Gwen Sherman were the ranching family whose reported experiences in the mid-1990s launched the ranch into public awareness. Their claims were first published in Utah's Deseret News and later expanded in the Las Vegas Mercury through a series of articles by journalist George Knapp. Robert Bigelow was a billionaire real estate developer with a documented, decades-long interest in UFOs, near-death experiences, home sweet home research. He funded not only NIDS, but also research grants to figures like Harvard psychiatrist Dr. John Mack. Bigelow has spoken publicly about personal tragedies, including the loss of his son and, later, his wife and grandson, as part of what drove his interest in questions of life after death. George Knapp was the investigative journalist whose original newspaper coverage of the Sherman family brought the ranch to Bigelow's attention. Knapp remained connected to the story for decades, later co-authoring the 2005 book Hunt for the Skinwalker with NIDS researcher Colm Kelleher. Brandon Fugel is the current owner, who purchased the ranch in 2016 and later partnered with the History Channel to produce The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, which brought Bumstead, the property, to a mainstream television audience, starting in 2020. Home Sweet Homestead. Dr. Travis Taylor is an aerospace engineer and physicist who joined Fugel's investigation team and became one of the show's central on-screen figures. Applying scientific instrumentation to the ranch's reported phenomena. Let's separate what is documented from what is claimed verifiably true. The property changed hands in the years, and for the approximate prices described. NIDS was a real organization, and its investigators, including retired U.S. Army Colonel John B. Alexander, have spoken publicly about their work. AAWSAP was a real, congressionally funded Pentagon program, and declassified references to it have surfaced through official disclosures. The Pentagon's own recent report on the historical record of U.S. government involvement with UFOs, produced by the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, discusses AAWSAP and Bigelow's role in it. Documented but unresolved. NIDS investigators, in their own accounts, and in Kelleher and Knapp's book, describe difficulty capturing hard evidence. Expensive surveillance equipment repeatedly failed to record events that witnesses claimed to see in person. The organization itself acknowledged difficulty obtaining evidence consistent with scientific publication. In other words, after years of funded investigation, no peer-reviewed or broadly accepted physical evidence of paranormal activity was produced. Disputed. This is where historians and skeptics diverge sharply from ranch investigators. Home Sweet Homestead. Skeptical researcher Robert Schaffer has pointed out that the Myers family, who owned the property for over 80 years before the Shermans, reported no supernatural events at all. Schaffer and other skeptics have suggested, and this is a theory, not a proven fact, that the Sherman family's claims may have been exaggerated, possibly to increase the property's resale value, with much of the most extreme testimony traceable to Terry Sherman specifically, who continued working as a caretaker after selling to Bigelow. Sweet Homestead. It's worth noting the Shermans reportedly sold at a financial loss, which complicates a purely profit-driven explanation. There is no historical consensus on what, if anything, has occurred at the ranch. What is certain is that the claims themselves, regardless of their truth, have had real, documented consequences. Real money. A real congressional appropriation. And a real television franchise. Home Sweet Homestead. 3 moments transformed this ranch from a private family property into a national phenomenon. The first was the Shermans going public with their story in the mid-1990s. A decision that, whatever its motive, put the ranch on the map and directly led to Bigelow's purchase. The second was the 2007 Senate appropriation that funded AAWSAP. This moment matters regardless of what one believes about the paranormal, because it shows how a private ranching dispute in rural Utah ultimately became entangled with federal government security D4 discourse around identified aerial phenomena. A topic that continues to receive sustained attention from Congress and the Pentagon. The Pentagon, Vexpertchen from Ensmenskanaportvet, attention from Congress, and Pentamentkot, in Fogs. The third was the 2020 premiere of The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch on the History Channel. This is the point where the property shifted from a niche subject for UFO researchers into mainstream pop culture, reaching millions of and turning figures like Brandon Fugel and Dr. Travis Taylor into recognizable names. Skinwalker Ranch's legacy isn't measured in proven discoveries. It's measured in influence. Home sweet, homestead. It helped popularize the modern idea that private citizens and even government-linked programs might seriously investigate paranormal claims using scientific method, a concept that has since become far more mainstream. Homestead, particularly as U.S. government interest in unidentified aerial phenomena, has become public policy through congressional hearings. It also became a case study, cited by both believers and skeptics, in how folklore, media coverage, and financial incentive can combine to build a modern legend. Whether one sees the ranch as a genuine, unexplained mystery or a well-marketed story, its cultural footprint is undeniable. The story of Skinwalker Ranch is ultimately a story about the space between evidence and belief. A family said something happened to them. A billionaire believed them enough to spend a fortune trying to prove it. A government body believed the question was worth $22 million of taxpayer funding. Home, sweet, homestead. And millions of viewers now believe it enough to keep a television show running for multiple seasons. None of that proves the paranormal claims are true. But it does prove something else. That the desire to find something beyond explanation is powerful enough to move real money, real government resources, and real careers, decade after decade, even without a single piece of evidence that has satisfied the scientific community. So, what really happened at Skinwalker Ranch? The honest answer is, we don't know. What we do know is documented, verifiable, and, in its own way, just as strange as any myth. A ranching family's claims, a billionaire's obsession, a Pentagon program, and a television empire, all built on a question that, more than 30 years later, still has no confirmed answer. Maybe that's the real mystery. Not what's buried in the Utah desert, but why, generation after generation, we keep looking.